Hey guys, Bartell's Bookshelf here with another update to my Read What You Own challenge. I just finished book 19, so I'm nearly finished with my goal of 25 books, so I'm very excited about that. I know I look messy, I need a haircut, but the thing is, I'm too fucking lazy to cut my hair, so here we are. These aren't all in the exact order that I read them, because some of them are part of series, and so I just bundled those together, but I'll just go through it. So first I read The Dark 30, Southern Tales of the Supernatural by Patricia C. McKissack, illustrated by Brian Pinkney. This is a pretty famous middle grade horror book from 1992, the premise of which is it's a bunch of spooky horror stories, kind of in the vein of something like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark or like The Twilight Zone, but inspired by African American folklore and kind of history and stuff. I was very excited to read this because it's a spooky book for kids, and I really enjoy stuff like that. It's a Newbery Award winner, Coretta Scott King Award winner. Big popular book. Really looking forward to it. But honestly, I found it a little bit lacking. It started off really well. A lot of the stories in here, they're original stories for the most part, but they use concepts from black folklore or elements of black history. So, for example, there's a story in here about the first black bus driver. There's a story in here that uses the first black railroad union as its basis. So stuff like that was really interesting. And they were decently creepy stories, I enjoyed those. But the thing that put me off about it eventually was that as it went on, the stories just kind of got a little bit silly. There was one really bizarre one, Boo Mama, which was involved Bigfoot and a kid being slowly transformed into a Bigfoot. It was really strange. I mean, but that was at least kind of interesting because it was weird and imaginative. Then the one right after that, which was called The Gingy, just really didn't do it for me. At first it was kind of interesting. It's about a young black woman who buys this mysterious figure that's said to have the spirit of a Yoruba witch inside of it, and she brings it to her home and creepy things start happening. It was an interesting idea, but in practice it kind of was just it was kind of just your typical trilogy of terror, creepy doll kind of thing. It didn't really do much with the black history folklore concept. And the thing that really sort of left a bad taste in my mouth was that so it's called Gingy because the only thing that can protect the family against this creature, this Yoruba spirit, is this monkey doll called a gingy, which is also apparently a Yoruba thing. And as I was reading the story, I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to look that up. And from all of the research that I could find, everything in the story was just totally made up. The Gingy, the Yoruba spirit, I couldn't find anything about any of those. I couldn't even find any pictures of any monkey dolls or anything. I even did specific searches for evil spirits in Yoruba folklore. I searched Gingy. I spent a while researching to try to find out more information about this stuff, and it just wasn't there. And once I found that out, that kind of just killed the rest of the book for me, because obviously people make up supernatural creatures all the time. That's fine, but what sort of bothered me in this case was that you have this book that's supposed to be specifically taking inspiration from African American history, folklore, with the intention of kind of educating people about those things. And I read a little bit about Patricia McKissack. That was kind of her stock in trade. She wrote a lot of historical fiction about sort of African American history and stuff like that. So it seemed a little bit disingenuous to be all about teaching people about these things and getting people back in. Indeed, a theme in the Gingy story is about young black people getting back in touch with sort of their culture. Because there's the woman who sells the girl the statue in the beginning of the story talks about how you modern people you've forgotten where you came from, that kind of thing. So that's kind of a recurring theme of the story is of reintegrating with your past, but the past that they're integrating with in this story is just totally just made up out of whole cloth. And it just seemed a little bit disingenuous to be I want to educate people, and then to just not use anything from reality or from actual folklore at all. And it also ended really weakly with the final story. It was, what was it called? Yeah, the chicken coop monster, which I just thought was just this really goofy story, apparently taken from the author's own life, about a young girl who thinks there's this chicken coop monster inside of her chicken coop, and she learns to defeat it through the power of love and facing her own fears. And I just thought it was really corny, and that just kind of like ruined the whole. That last sort of third of it just kind of ruined the whole book for me. I mean, there was, like I said, there are interesting ideas. There's the stories themselves are very simplistic, very like Twilight Zone-esque, sort of just desserts kind of things, or like hauntings, but like they were at least well done, and they took from actual periods of history and they integrated them into the stories in interesting ways. But then I felt like it just kind of fell apart. The illustrations are quite cool though. They're these sort of like I don't know what you'd call them. They're like they're like etchings on like black paper, I assume is what they are, but they're really cool, really spooky. So that was cool. But like overall, I just thought this collection was kind of disappointing. If there's more stuff out there like this, that's sort of like supernatural stories using like sort of a African American culture or folklore as their basis, or just any kind of culture, I find that stuff really interesting. So if you know of anything else out there like this, let me know. I'd like to read more of it, but this wasn't it, unfortunately. And then I read the second book in the Dancing Gods series. This is Demons of the Dancing Gods by Jack L. Chalker. I read the first book earlier this year, and I enjoyed it a lot. It was just very solid, fun, sort of a slightly tongue-in-cheek fantasy, kind of in the vein of like a little bit of like Terry Pratchett or like Piers Anthony, that kind of vibe. I was just in the mood for something like that again, something fun and silly. And yeah, this is basically more of the same. I didn't like this as much as the first one. But basically, this follows, Marge and Joe, who are working for this sorcerer named Throckmorton P. Redigore, to defeat this dark baron, and to sort of save the world of the dancing gods, which is sort of like this alternate fantasy world where it's kind of like all of our fantasy ideas and tropes sort of come from. That's governed by these huge books of rules that sort of play on like fantasy tropes and stuff. This is basically just more of the same. It was entertaining. There was some stuff in it that I really liked, some concepts that I really enjoyed, like in the story, Joe gets bitten by a were. It's not a specific any kind of were creature, it's just a were, which apparently is very rare, and so basically that means like whenever the full moon rolls around, he just turns into whatever is nearest to him, whatever living creature is nearest to him. I thought that was really interesting, and he uses that throughout the book to kind of like sneak into places and stuff. That was pretty interesting. There's like this barbarian woman that I really liked, who sort of becomes this cult leader that was pretty interesting. There were some just interesting ideas, but I just thought, like, I don't know, I already felt like we were kind of like in diminishing returns here. It started off really strong, like I was just having a lot of fun kind of coasting along with the story, and then as it went on, like I just thought the ending was a little bit weak, and I don't know, just overall, it just kind of overstayed its welcome, I think. I do want to continue the series because they're very quick, easy reads, and the books themselves aren't super long. But I really hope that it finds some new life, because I mean we're on the second book and I'm already getting a little bit fatigued of it. So I don't know. It was okay, but I didn't love it. Next, I read. I mentioned this before. I read more books in the Legend of Drizzt series. I read books 2 and 3, that is Exile and Sojourn. So, yeah, my friend Nakia loves this series, and I read the first book earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. And again, similar to Demons of the Dancing Gods, I just picked this off the shelf because, it's like they're like nice, light, fun fantasy novels that are well written and just entertaining, just, popcorn entertainment, and I was in the mood for that sort of stuff. And what surprised me was how quickly I got through them and how quickly I enjoyed them. The second one here, Exile, was definitely my favorite. This features Drizzt during his time living in the Underdark after leaving Menzoberranzan, the city where he grew up, and dealing with kind of the isolation, the loneliness. The thing that surprised me the most about this book in particular was how dark and sad it was. Obviously, with a name like Exile, that kind of gives you an idea, and it deals a lot with themes of like isolation and loneliness and sort of trying to find your place in the world. Very much like in the vein of like sort of your classic middle trilogy, Two Towers, Empire Strikes Back kind of thing, where it's like, you see the hero at his lowest moments, and I really enjoyed that. There are a lot of really fun characters in this, like Belwar Disengulp, who's a mountain gnome who has these like magical hands that he that have like magical picks and and hammers and stuff on them, and he's a really fun character. They meet a guy named Clacker, who's this big, monstrous hook horror, who was actually a peck, which is like another similar kind of stone creature that was polymorphed by an evil wizard into a hook horror. And his whole storyline is like really sweet and really tragic, and that really like hooked me to the book. Like I was like screaming at Nakia after I was reading it out, because there's so much like horrible shit happens, and like Drizzt goes through so much torment and pain that like at the end of the book, I was like yelling at Nakia. I was like, "How dare you? You got me into this series, and now it's like ripping my heart apart." And on top of that, there's all this stuff going on with Drizzt's father, who gets resurrected as this sort of like zombie spirit by his mother, and he's like coming after him the whole time. That was a lot of fun. So there was just a lot of really interesting plot lines that were that all came together and tied together in really intricate ways. Very tightly plotted, I thought. Really suspenseful. I just really enjoyed it. Obviously, like, it's not high literature or anything, but there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you just want a good, comforting fantasy read, and that's what these provide. I'm really enjoying them. So I enjoyed it so much, actually, I pretty much immediately moved on to book 3, which is Sojourn, which deals with Drizzt's experiences on the surface and his sort of slow integration into the surface world, the society of the surface world, getting to know some of the humans and the dwarves and stuff who live in the Forgotten Realms. I didn't like this one as much as the first two. This is probably my least favorite of the trilogy, which seems to be what most people feel, what most fans feel. Although, I have to say, like, I was on a forum a few days ago, where people were talking about the Drizzt series, and everybody hated this book for some reason. People kept saying, read the first two, but skip this one, skip this one, skip this one, it sucks. But nobody explained why. I don't really understand why people seem to hate it so much, because so this wasn't my favorite, and the main reason for that was because I felt like it wasn't as tightly plotted as the first two. The first two books, they very much, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. All the characters and the plot lines all kind of tie in together. Everything converges really well. There's a very clear arc for Drizzt. This one I felt was a little bit messy, a little bit all over the place, because not only does it deal with Drizzt coming to the surface, it deals with the prejudice that he faces from the humans, it deals with him slowly learning about the fact that he's, destined to kind of be a ranger and to be devoted to this goddess. It deals with him... So it deals with him kind of learning to be accepted in the surface world. It deals with him moving to Icewind Dale and sort of slowly ingratiating himself into the community there. And then on top of that, there's like so many villains in this. There's like the orc chieftain Grouch. There's this mountain man Roddy McGristle, who's like coming after him throughout the entire book. There's this big dragon at one point named Hephaestus. There's just a lot of stuff going on, and I felt like, unlike the first two books, it didn't really have the space and the breathing room to really fully develop all of these disparate plot lines and kind of tie them together into like a coherent character arc. But still, I mean, I still enjoyed it. It was still fun. It was still plenty entertaining, Again, I mean, fantasy fluff, but that's okay, Not everything has to be fucking mired in the depths of Stygian despair, Not everything has to be literary. It's just good, solid fantasy. And at the end of the day, like, though I had a lot of problems with sort of the plotting and the pacing and everything, I still enjoyed it, and I enjoyed where it left us with the character of Drizzt, and I'm very much interested to see where it goes. So this is the first trilogy, and then the second trilogy, which is technically the first trilogy because it came out before these. But I'm very interested to check out the second trilogy, but I'm gonna sit on it for a bit, because I don't like to like overload myself with one type of book too much, but I have really been enjoying these books. I can see why Nakia enjoys them so much. They're just good, solid fantasy reads, and Drizzt is a great character. I love reading about him, and I'm definitely very interested to see where he'll end up. I only have the first 9 books, I think, so we'll see how far I feel like going, because there's like 40 of these. But so far, like, they're good, solid reads. They're very quick. They're very easy to read. They're uncomplicated in a good way. Like when I say all that, when I say they're easy and stuff, I don't mean that in a disparaging way. They're just very solid, well written, just fun fantasy adventure things that are they're a little bit tropey, but they're executed well. And I've always said that well-worn tropes that are executed well can be sublime, and I think in this case, like, they are. I really enjoy these. They're a lot of fun. Definitely look forward to seeing where these go. So yeah, there you go. And I read another, this was a Star Trek duology here. This is Star Trek Dark Passions, Book 1 and Book 2 by Susan Wright. These are essentially one book that were split into two by the editor of Pocket Books at the time, John Ordover. Apparently that was something he did a lot back then. So this is essentially one book, so I'm talking about it as if it's one book. But so again, I was really, really excited about these because this is a novel taking place entirely in the Mirror Universe, focusing on sort of the bad women of Trek, you know. As you can see, there's Intendant Kira there, there's Seven of Nine, there's Troy. So I was really, really looking forward to this because I love, a lot of people don't for some reason, I guess because they can be a bit silly and over the top, but that's why I like them. I love the Mirror Universe episodes because it's just Star Trek getting to indulge in, because, you know, normally Star Trek is so, like, sunshiny, and there's always, like, sort of a sense of hope, and everyone's always nice to each other, you know, so it's always kind of fun to have a Mirror Universe episode where everyone's just backstabbing and horrible, and there's just a lot of conniving. So I was really, really excited for this, and yeah, this sucked. I'm sorry to say. It's tough to put into words, but because it's just, like, in terms of, like, the actual prose, like, nothing's overly wrong with it. Like, it feels like the overall, like, plot beats and everything, like, it all makes sense. There's nothing, like, egregiously stupid in it. It's not terribly written on, like, a prose level. Yeah, so basically, this is about Intendant Kira, like, right before and during when she becomes Intendant, and it focuses on Agent 7, 7 of 9, who in this universe is agent of the Obsidian Order. She was raised by an Auburntane through a long, complicated series of things that I don't even remember and I don't want to get into because it's complicated and I don't care about any of it. She's basically forced to take out Kira. So in order to do that, she poses as a free Terran slave, and basically has to sort of worm her way into Intendant Kira's affections. And along the way, you've got Troy, who is the lover of Regent Worf, and she's trying to build this like gaming paradise on Beta Z2 and stuff like that. And it's, you know, your typical backstabby intrigue type stuff. But the thing about it, I just found the prose and just the overall, just everything was just so dry, you know? I was really excited about it, especially because these are meant to be, you know, this is meant to be like a very dark, kind of sexy, you know, twisted version of the Star Trek universe with lots of queer women in it. In fact, Kira ends up in sexual relationships, or at least sexually interested in pretty much like every woman in the story, and even Seven kind of like falls in love with her a little bit. That was kind of like the main sort of hook of the story, and that was one of the things that really intrigued me about it. But man, it's just something about just the way it's written. It's just so sterile and dull. The prose is just dry. Most of the dialogue is just people talking about trade agreements and like just going on, and the actual like writing, the actual like page-to-page prose is just endlessly just info dumping and like describing, you know, like Kira was doing this because by doing this she would be able to get this trade agreement that would lead her to have control over this sector, and it was just so fucking boring. And I was just like, man, like, what false advertisement? I mean, you know, you look at that cover and, you know, doesn't that just scream trade agreements, you know? Like, there's a whole subplot in the book about Troy trying to get licensing for gaming in her sector so that she can have, you know, like gambling in her like resort thing. And there's a whole thing about that. It's just like, man, this is so fucking boring. Yeah, everybody is just like so robotic and like, I don't know, man. It was just so dull. And then in the second book, they try to do this thing where Seven kind of has this change of heart, and she like betrays the Obsidian Order and sort of learns to kind of embrace her humanity, similarly to how she does in Voyager. This second book is only 200 pages, so you have to go through all of this character development in 200 pages, and I didn't buy any of it. It's just so like dull and just way too fast-paced. It doesn't take the time to breathe, to really get us into this universe, to let us get to know any of the characters. The dialogue is just rote and info-dumpy and boring. And again, don't be fooled by the cover. Crusher and Janeway are on this, but they really feature in maybe 2 scenes. They really don't have that much of a stake in the plot. So yeah, again, just super false advertising. So yeah, just very disappointing. Probably one of the worst things I've read this year, I'm sorry to say, but I really didn't enjoy these. I don't know, maybe if you really, really like Mirror Universe stuff, and if you're just like crazy, like if you're a Star Trek completist, maybe, because I was looking on Goodreads, and some people seem to like this, so I don't know, maybe you'd like it, but I don't know, man. Like, in a lot of the Mirror Universe episodes, there's this kind of like this gleeful sense of like darkness and sort of twisting things, you know, and fucking with the natural order, and there's just this very gleeful sense of macabre to them, you know, and you can tell that like there's a sense of like fun that the writers are having, where it's just like, man, yeah, like we just get to like cut loose and be like dark and sexy and crazy, you know, and there was just none of that in these books. There was no like character, there was no personality. They were just dull as dishwater, dull. So yeah, unfortunately, very disappointing, but that was that. And then for my final read for this roundup, this is back on my vintage sci-fi train. This is The Space Merchants by Frederik Pohl and C.M. Kornbluth. This is a classic science fiction novel. As it says there, over 700,000 copies in print. Very well respected, very well loved piece of science fiction. In fact, it was actually collected in the Library of America book of 50s science fiction novels, which is edited by Gary K. Wolfe, the lecturer of those that Great Courses series that I mentioned in my previous video. So it's one of those sci-fi classics that I've always been meaning to get to, and I finally did. And yeah, this was a breath of fresh air after the disappointment of Dark Passions. I really enjoyed this. So this was originally published in 1953. Well, it was serialized in 1952, I think, in Galaxy magazine under the name Gravy Planet, and then it was compiled into book form in 1953. Frederik Pohl actually became editor of Galaxy Science Fiction after H.L. Gold passed it on to him. And so basically the plot, it takes place in the future, where Earth is basically just completely decimated by pollution and consumerism. In fact, this takes place. The world that this takes place in is heavily consumerist. Everything is about how things are sold to people. The culture is based on advertisements. Corporations basically control all of the government. The government's basically just like a puppet for the corporations. And we follow Mitchell Courtenay, who is a copysmith star class for this big Madison Avenue advertising company called Fowler Shock and Associates, and he's given the task to head up their Venus campaign. So the company, through a long series of battles, got the rights to the planet Venus. It's basically Mitchell's job to essentially sell the planet of Venus to all of these new potential customers, these new potential pioneers who will be traveling to Venus. But of course, the thing about Venus is that it's basically almost completely uninhabitable. It's a gaseous planet. It's just and everybody would have to be wearing suits and packed into these tiny houses like sardines. So Mitch Courtenay's job is basically to kind of sell Venus to these people through typical advertising, methods. Kind of romanticizing the whole idea of it, the idea of being this, a pioneer in the frontier of space, and you'll be the first to break ground on this wonderful new experience, blah blah blah. And then he gets sabotaged and shanghaied up to this workers facility, and things kind of kick off from there. So yeah, this was a great book. The thing that really surprised me about it was how prescient it was, especially for 1953. I mean, all the stuff that it has to say about sort of a consumerism, environmentalism, how corporations see people as just consumers to sell products to and nothing more. In fact, they refer to anybody who's not working within advertising are referred to as consumers by the characters in the book. So everything is like looked at through this lens of like consumerism and like and who can we sell this to and who will buy this, As I said, there's a lot of stuff about environmentalism. There's this sort of a terrorist cell of conservationists that are known as Kanzis, which is sort of echoes, the commie sentiments of the 1950s. And of course, there's all this like propaganda about them that over time Mitchell sort of learns the truth to. It just really surprised and shocked me how like prescient this was in terms of how it wrote about sort of the whole Madison Avenue advertising firms. I mean, because this was published in 1953. This is before Mad Men. This is before the 80s. The Reaganomics and the hyper consumerism of the 80s. This is before Enron, all that stuff. But aside from a few like technological things and some gender politics and stuff, it's surprisingly like it feels modern to me, and it's really funny. Of course, a lot of the fun, it's not really like funny haha, it's more just like schadenfreude, I guess you'd say. That's so fucked up, that it's funny. So like Mitch is so like brainwashed into the whole advertising culture that like he thinks of everything in terms of advertising, and he goes on all these like tangents about he's talking about, for example, in one scene he's talking about this Kanzi guy that he's like sort of fallen in with. And he talks about how like, oh, it's such a shame that a guy like this who's like so ready to who's so full of life and joie de vivre, who would be so easy to like sell to, like he could have been one of the regulars, he could have been happily buying his products and living his life and everything, and it's like, oh, it's just such a shame that he turned into a Kanzi, he turned out this way, stuff like that. There's sort of intimations throughout the story that like books are like very, very uncommon, or like the books that do exist are just kind of like pulp trash, History is kind of a sketchbook. There's a scene where Courtney goes to a local museum, and instead of being about like historical figures like George Washington or whatever, it's about he talks about there's an exhibit to George Washington Hill, who was like apparently the first big advertising man in this culture that kind of like codified their society, and so just everything in their society is built around advertisements, and the corporations have all the power. There's all these specific laws and regulations that the corporations have to follow, even down to like murder is allowed, but they have to go through like a specific series of like legal ramifications in order to murder somebody from a rival company. They have to have the proper paperwork signed. They have to inform the other company that they plan to do it. So it's very like rigorous and stratified and everything. So it was a really fascinating, really dark, satirical, just really funny book. I can see why it's become a classic, and I definitely want to read more of Pohl and Kornbluth's stuff. C.M. Kornbluth unfortunately died in 1958. He died pretty young. But he left behind a pretty impressive spate of short stories, which I plan to read eventually. And as I said, Frederick Pohl is a very accomplished sci-fi writer and editor. He died more recently in 2013. But he's also left behind a pretty impressive body of work. So I definitely look forward to digging more into these two. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I didn't explain it very well, I don't think, but hopefully I gave you enough of an idea to make you decide if you want to read it. I thought it was great. I thought it was really funny, really, really sharp, biting satire. Loved it. So a very good end to my reading for this batch of books. So there you go. That's books 13 through 19 of my Read What You Own challenge. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you think of them. I'll probably see you guys next time when I finish off the challenge, hopefully. So until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye.